it's Dawn from the Creation Station Fabric and Quilt Shop in beautiful Buellton, California. I am here today to show you a video tutorial on one of our more popular kits in the shop, the pillowcase. It is a 3-part pillowcase. There's a main body, a contrasting strip, and a cuff. The nice part is this is made with the simple, easy, like burrito method, where you're only rolling it all up and there's only 3 seams to create the whole pillowcase. On the inside, the side seams are a French seam, so it's all finished and nice and pretty. You don't need a fancy serger or anything to do it. And even the cuff, when it's all rolled up, this is all enclosed inside, so you can wash it till your heart's content and it'll never fray. Okay, let's get started. Our kits are all packaged and they even have an instruction sheet included inside. That's the whole point of the video, right? We're gonna make it nice and easy. So let's get started. We're gonna open this up. There's 3 pieces inside. First thing you want to do, especially if you're working with children, is identify the pieces. So again, the instructions, they're all in here, nice and easy. So you've got a body, and these are cut straight off the bolt. And this is 26 inches across by the width of the fabric. And I purposely chose a directional fabric for this project because I want to make special note that you know how to lay out a directional piece. So the next piece that's included is a cuff. This is 10 inches across. And I chose a directional cuff. So again, I can show you which way to put it on there so your pillowcases don't end up upside down. And there is a 2-inch contrast piece. One of the reasons we chose the size of 26 inches and 10 inches, because if you do the math and you put those together, that makes 36 inches, and that's a yard. So you could take 2 yards of fabric, cut them at 10 inches, and swap out the pieces and have like 2 opposite pillowcases. Plus, it's a great yield for your measurements. Okay, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take this over to the ironing board to get started, and we're gonna fold it in half lengthwise, and we're going to press it all the way down. Let's go do that. Now that our package is open, take out your 3 pieces, and I just wanted to show you up close and personal the contrast strip. So after you've ironed out the center crease or any additional creases from being in the package, we're going to lay the contrast strip. This is the first step in the production. Lay it right side down, okay, wrong side up, and starting on the right hand side, because I'm right-handed,
move the iron.
I'm gonna fold this up and being really careful not to stretch or pull. I'm pushing straight up, lining up this raw edge with the other raw edge. And you can see my little frog hop motion here. I'm lifting the iron and pressing as I go. No ironing, no sweeping back and forth. You want a nice crisp edge, and you want to be sure that these 2 raw edges are lined up. Okay, the first thing we want to do after we've pressed our contrast strip is lay out the cuff fabric. Okay, and I'm not really using the mat as a reference, but I'm just lining it up, you know, so it looks pretty on camera. And I chose specifically directional fabric so that you would make the best choices when sewing it together. So when you're laying out your cuff fabric, you want the cuff fabric to be laying right side up on a pinning surface. That doesn't mean your nice dining room table, but on a pinning surface of some kind. And if you have directional fabric, you want it to be oriented upside down to you. So the fabric pretty side up, but oriented upside down. Okay, so these little sunglasses, facing you, they're right side up, but facing me, they're upside down. The next thing I'm gonna do is grab my contrast strip that we've already pressed. And I wanna bring your attention to, we're gonna lay this on top of our body fabric, and you wanna line it up with the selvages on the left-hand side. Don't line it up middle of your project, and I'll explain this a little further along, but there's a reason to line it up on the left. And you wanna make sure that all of your raw edges are lined up exactly together, okay? Don't cheat. Make sure it's really accurate. Grab my pins. And I'm going to pin towards my belly, perpendicular, especially if you're working with kids, this is kind of important. And as for a measurement, I usually use pinky to thumb. This is sort of a pin basting. It's about 6 inches with my hand. Now be careful not to stretch this. If you're working on this project with kids, they don't have a really good sense of measurement yet, so using body parts as a measuring tool is perfect. Okay, still nice and even. If when you take your fabric out of the kit, it's really wrinkled, you might want to take it to the ironing board and press it. But luckily, this one was already in pretty good shape. Save myself a step. Now you're going to notice as I get over here to the very end, the selvages are not going to line up. That's okay. We're going to take care of that later. And that's why you want to be sure to line up on the left. So as an adult, this is perfect. For a kid, if they're working on this project, they have a hard time keeping things together and lined up smoothly when they're taking out pins and sewing. So I have the kids go back in and use a 3-finger measurement. So they would put down 3 fingers and add another pin. Even though this is still just basting and holding our project together, it's gonna make a world of difference with their finished product, okay? So I'm gonna take those 2 out, move on to the next step, and we'll talk about the kids some more. Okay, if you're following along with the paper instructions that are included, we're on step 4. So you wanna take your body fabric, which is this adorable little bathing suit fabric. And again, I picked a directional fabric to make sure that you were lining it up properly. You're going to find the top, okay, so it's registered vertically, the top of your fabric. And this time, that's the side that you want at the top of your project, but you wanna place it right side down, okay? This is important, right side down. And I'm laying it directly on top of my previous cuff and contrast strip. Here's the body, and again, it's registered to me properly. To you, it's upside down. Right sides to right sides. And I'm gonna start on this left corner. And what I'm gonna do is hold them all together firmly, take out my pin, and repin. Again, these are our little basting pins that are on here. So I'm gonna line this up nice and flat. Be sure that we're not stretching in any way. And this just helps hold all the pieces together. I'm gonna line it up across as we go. If you've got any wispy tails, don't worry about them. Don't pull on them, but don't worry about them. Those are gonna get all tucked inside. So over here, most likely, again, this is not gonna line up. So we have 3 different finished lengths. We don't care, we're gonna trim this side later. All we care about is that the left side is all lined up straight. Again, I'll tell you the magic secret why in a minute here. So here is the body. And it's laid out all nice and flat with all 3 pieces underneath. All right, here's the magic. Are you ready? We're gonna take the lower bottom edge of the pillowcase cuff body, and we're going to make a little fold just to keep it on the table because it's long. And we're gonna snugly roll it upward towards our pinning, all right? At some point, you're gonna roll and expose the cuff. That's perfect. Don't roll the cuff up inside. Okay, I'm gonna stop about right here. Now I'm going to take the lower edge of the cuff, pull it up and over the top of my roll. And again, I'm working on the left hand, my left-hand side. And I'm lining up this corner. And I'm gonna take out this pin, again, that's basted, and re-put the pin in. I'm gonna make sure that this is all lined up. Take out my basting pin. Put it back in. Again, careful not to stretch and pull as I go. You want it all nice and flat. All the way down. Pinning is really the secret to a productive project. It keeps everything in place, keeps your grain line in place. All right. Now, as an adult, I'll be honest, I could probably take this to the machine and sew it. But if you're working with kids or you don't have a great foundation with your skills yet, or maybe you have a machine that doesn't have a properly functioning feed dog, you're gonna wanna add some more pins to this for the best outcome, okay? So let's go back and add a few more pins. I tell my kids to use a 2-finger rule, 2 finger and a pin. All right, 2 finger and a pin. As adults, we don't need to be that cautious. So I would probably go back in and put like 2 more pins in between each section. I teach a lot of kids, so a lot of my instructions are based on working with them. And again, their motor skills aren't developed, so it's another reason why I'm having the heads at the top and having them go perpendicular. If you've got somebody that's having trouble pinning, I tell them to poke in at the top and push it up towards their belly button, right? Kids identify with body parts they've always got with them. So push the pin in and up towards the cuff until you get all the way to the end.
Call from Woodland Hills.
Okay, we're ready to sew. So remember how I kept talking about lining up everything on the left side? This is the reason. When you sit down at the sewing machine, that's the side that's gonna go underneath the presser foot first. So in order to not have to trim so much off both sides, if you've got it all lined up on the left, you're ready to go. Now this first seam is a 1/4 inch, or if you're like me and you have a skinny foot, it's just slightly less than a 1/4 inch, like a scant 1/4 foot. You want to line the edge of your project up with the edge of your foot. Now, if you're working on this with kids, you're probably going to have a wider foot, and it's okay to use the edge of the foot with one of those like wide zigzag feet, because they're usually not capable of keeping it right next to the edge yet. So I'm going to hold on to my tails. I'm going to take 4 stitches forward and 4 stitches back. That's Miss Dawn's rule of thumb. And as long as you sew slow, you can sew over the pins and or pull them out as you go. The most important thing is you just don't want it to creep and keep pushing the layers apart. If you have a walking foot in there, you can go ahead and use the walking foot, and that'll help keep it. So we're just gonna sew all the way to the end here. Okay, as we're approaching the end, make sure everything's lined up, and I'm gonna backstitch, but I'm gonna backstitch on this side of my selvage, the print anyway, and then I'm gonna sew all the way off the end. Lift your presser foot, pull out your threads, and trim. Okay, now that we've sewn the entire cuff all the way down, we've kind of made this tube, thus the name the burrito method. First thing you want to do is trim off your starter threads. I'm a firm believer in tidying as you go, so don't leave any loose threads. If you're following along on your instruction sheet, this is step 6, and that sentence starts out with, "This will seem odd." So if you open up your tube, literally almost like a pair of tube socks, you're gonna see inside the body rolled up. And what you wanna do is gently start rolling this down and pulling out your body. And it's gonna kind of coil back onto itself like a big slinky, if you will. Get the tail out of the way. You see that? Just pulls right up inside there. And voila, almost like magic, you've got your cuff, your contrast strip, your bathing beauties. Notice the orientation, right side up, right side up. Here's the seam we just made, and it's all encased in there, nice and pretty. And for the voila moment, here we go. All right, seam number 1. So now we're gonna take this to the ironing board and press this out nice and flat on both sides. Okay, so now I'm at the ironing board and I'm ready to press. And it may seem silly, but I actually press this in a 3-step process, especially with kids. So I wanna lay it right side down on my ironing board, nice and flat, smooth the wrinkles out. And what I wanna do is I wanna press the cuff up ever so quickly with my iron, but I don't wanna iron up here, and I don't wanna put a lot of pressure on my iron. I just wanna do a quick straight up, and I'm just getting that seam nice and pressed. And yes, I have to admit, I do love an old school iron. So see how I'm careful not to get all the way to the top? And I'm not pressing so hard that on the other side, I'm making a real crease on that contrast strip. So press this first, and then we're gonna flip it over. All right, now with the contrast down and this cuff up, I'm gonna do another press with a little bit more force. Do you see how much slack we're sort of pulling out of there and getting a nice crisp opening? If this were an open seam on the back side, and I'm still not pressing all the way at the top. Again, I'm lifting and pressing straight up, none of this. No ironing, only pressing straight up. Now that I've got a nice flat front and a nice flat back, I'm gonna come back down to my start again, and I'm gonna repress all the way up, making that nice sharp crease at the top. And again, you can see I'm using the nose of the iron and I'm pressing straight up. None of this. Lifting as I come forward, pressing up, lift and up. Okay, back to our cutting station. Okay, now that we're all pressed, we're ready for the next step, which is to trim before we take our last 2 seams. So I wanted to highlight this section right here. This is where that fabrics are 3 different lengths. This isn't unusual from the manufacturer, and this one isn't unusual in that they're making really cute selvages now that you can use in other projects. So you've got a couple choices with your trimming, so let me tell you what those are. You can trim each one of these separately. So I'm going to use my rotary ruler, and I'm looking right here. I'm checking a straight line on my selvage. So in order to trim this straight right here, right, I'm keeping it lined up, not necessarily lined up on this mat, but I'm just showing you, you could trim this whole side down straight in one step, spin it around, line this up, trim off, here's where the edge of the print is. Lining up, it looks like it's about a 1/2 inch all the way down, and you could trim this off and then line them up for the next step. Or I'm lazy, I like to do it all at one time. And the portion of this that's going to seem really odd is that since it's a French seam, you want to put wrong sides together. Wrong sides together. Newsflash, we know that that seems counterintuitive to everything that you do in sewing, but for a French seam, you want to start with wrong sides together. And I want to make sure that I trim this right here. So I'm sort of sticking my hand in there for a little visual measurement. All right, looks like that's where my 2 edges need to be lined up. I'm lining up the top of my cuff and give it a little flick here. And I know it'll be hard for you to see this in full frame, so I'm going to have to move it to get the job done. So right here, if I'm lining this ruler up with this, see how that's going to cut off the selvage right here, and it's going to trim it all the way down. Okay. All right, here we go. Lined up again. Okay, so sometimes this bottom edge may not be lined up exactly where you want it to, especially if kids are sewing these. So it's always okay to give this a little haircut, even though this is only like a little 1/8 of an inch. You can give it a haircut off the bottom if you want. I don't recommend letting kids use the rotary cutter, but this is an easy task for the adults to do so that they get a perfect project. I'm going to slide this forward, and I'm going to pin again, starting on my left. I always start pinning on my left because, again, that's where the sewing machine is going to start its sewing. And I am going to put in my pins about 2 to 3 inches apart. So again, with kids, their rule of measurement really isn't, so I'm going to use 3 fingers. I laugh, depending on the kid. Sometimes they need 4 fingers, sometimes they need 2 fingers. Okay, as an adult, we're just going to lickety split down the side. Now, if you have a serger or you're doing another alternate seam finish that is not a French seam, then you would probably go back to basics and put right sides together, because you're going to finish that edge off on your serger and it'll be inside. But since we're not using a serger and we're going to do a French seam, I'm going to put a pin on the corner, and then I'm going to pivot right here at the corner. And I'm going to go all the way across the bottom, still pinning. Again, some of you adults may not need to pin and feel it's overkill. I feel like I get the best results by pinning and keeping it in line, and since we've got a second seam after this one, I want to make sure that everything stays lined up. Okay, let's take that to our sewing machine for seam 1. Okay, we're ready to sew the first seam in the French seam. I wanted to point out that I was using contrast thread, hopefully to make it a little easier to see on camera. I would use a blending thread, something that doesn't show up. For the first seam, you really want a 1/4 inch or something that's even a scant 1/4. As an adult, again, it's real easy to stay next to the edge. For kids, not so much. I'm going to go forward for 4 stitches and back stitch 4. 1. Okay, and now I'm going to truck on down. When I get to this contrast strip, there are a ton of layers right here with all the seams. So you really do need to slow down a bit and go over nice and easy and slow. If you need to stop and adjust, accuracy is more important than speed. When I get to the corner here, I'm going to demonstrate a good old-fashioned garment technique for pivoting. Okay, I'm going to make sure my needle is down. I'm stopped right before the edge. And typically, people think of a pivot as just a straight 90 and then keep on sewing. But if you really want a nice clean corner, instead of a 90, take a single stitch on a 45. Then pivot your project. And keep on going. And what that does is it creates this little diagonal so that when you turn your fabric, you can have a little bit more room there rather than having a stitch right in the center of it. All right, let's finish off down to the edge and back stitch again. There goes the thread. All right, this is the fold edge and I'm still gonna backstitch. And that completes our first seam and the French seam. We're gonna go ahead and take this to the ironing board next. Okay, so we're at the pressing board now, the ironing board. And again, tidy work project. Make sure that you trim off your excess threads before you get started. And if you find that on this one long edge, you have a lot of shag, kids do, quite frankly, because they run their hand down it, go ahead and trim off some of those little extra wispies. And this corner that we talked about, zooming in with this 45 right here, you want to go ahead and trim that on a 45, nice and close, but not too close, okay? So we're ready to press. I'm gonna lay it on my board. And the first thing I'm gonna do is what's called setting the seam. So we're gonna press it nice and flat. I'm lifting, pressing, none of this slidey stuff. And what this does is it pushes the threads in between the 2 layers so it lays nice and flat. That blue thread shows up nice and pretty. All right, now I'm gonna reach inside my pillowcase. I'm gonna go all the way down here to my corner where I clipped it. I'm gonna grab that corner and pull it all the way inside out. Okay, you can stick your hands in there, get your finger. This is the fold side, there's no seam there. And I'm gonna push that out. I'm even gonna use a little closed pair of scissors to kind of pop that out nice and straight. See how clean that is? And it lays nice and flat inside. I'm gonna go down to the other side. This is the seam edge and the bottom. Use my closed scissors to kind of poke that out. And you should get a pretty good little angle there because we made that special pivot on a 45. Okay, I'm gonna lay this with the side seam up. This is complicated to explain. My kids call it the pushy. So here's the side seam. And what you want to do is sort of use your hands and roll this all the way up to the top so that the seam is right at the edge of the fabric. Okay, You don't want to accidentally press it without rolling it, because what you're going to get is this weird little pocket fold in here. And then when we go to take our next seam, the raw edges of the fabric are going to be exposed. So it's really important to roll this all the way up to the edge. Again, Miss Dawn's secret technique called pushy pushy. I happen to have man hands, so I have a lot of ridges and calluses, which helps me grip onto the fabric. If you don't, you might want to put a little spit on your fingers. I call it the one notion that I always have with me. A little moisture or a little sponge with some water in it, and you can see how I'm just pushing that right up to the edge. Okay, the moisture sort of from your fingers helps push it, otherwise it just keeps sliding on top. I've got my little fingernail underneath that seam allowance. Now right here, don't forget, that's going to be extra bulky because that's where all the seams come together. That's okay. Just do a good job. Get it pushed up there nice and flush. Now I'm going to turn to the bottom edge and do the same thing. So we've gone down the side seam, and now we're pushing the bottom seam for the pushy pushy. You see how it just gets up there? And you can almost see the blue threads popping through. That's what I was trying to do with the contrast thread. Okay, now after I have pressed that, again, with my kids, I like to help hold everything in place. So I'm gonna put a few pins in to hold that pressed seam right where it needs to be. If you're an adult, you may want to skip this step, but again, if it slides around, you're gonna really be sorry, because that seam is going to be exposed to those raw edges, and what we're doing is making sure that we keep those locked in that seam. Okay, here's see how bulky that is? You're gonna have to slow down quite a bit when you stitch over that so you don't break a needle. All right, now that I'm pinned and ready, let's go back to the sewing machine for our last seam. Okay, let's complete that second seam forming the French seam. So I've got my tails exposed. Now this time you need a larger seam allowance. Can you see how much further over I've come from the side of my foot? So if you started out with a 1/4 inch seam, you may want to do a 3/8. If you started out with a scant quarter, you may want to have what I call a fat quarter or a heavy quarter. Okay, I've been using the side of my sled foot. So my fabric is inside, right about here is my seam allowance from my first seam. So that means when I sew here, it's going to be caught inside, and that's what you want. As long as the second seam is deeper than the first seam, you'll catch it inside. So again, let's forward 4 and back 4. Okay. Coming up on that contrast strip where it's nice and bulky, nice and slow. If you have a machine that doesn't have a heavy duty motor in it, you may need to use the hand wheel and coax it over the top. Again, I don't know if you can see this, but I can use my fingernail and run it down the ridge of that first seam right there, so I know I'm catching it inside. Coming up on my corner. Again, I want to stop equidistant from the edge. So I'm going to take that seam. I'm going to go ahead and put in my 45 fancy pantsy pivot. Turn my project. This is the fold edge. Go ahead and backstitch one more time. Pull up your project. Don't forget to trim those threads. And I'm going to spin it around and trim my cuff now. Always keep a tidy workspace. All right, now we're going to go back to the ironing board for the final press. Okay, so we've put in that second seam on our front seam. We're going to go ahead and again press, setting the seam. Just make it nice and clean and smooth before we flip it right side out for the big reveal. Turn it and press the bottom. Okay, so we're going to reach inside now. See how that's nice and finished, and you've got it all encapsulated in that one little seam, even your contrast strip. So I'm going to reach inside, grab that same corner again, pull it right side out, poke your fingers in the corners. Okay, so right here, you see how there's just a couple little threads right here? This is actually the edge of the other prior seam that just didn't get caught in there. If that bothers you, especially if they're really long, you should trim them. You need to be very careful to not accidentally nick the fabric. If this is a kid working on their pillowcase, I would probably not let them for fear that they would accidentally nick the fabric. But as we all know, some fabrics are shaggier than others. And we're gonna, just for nice presentation, we're gonna do that little pushy one more time here on the edge. A little spit on my fingers. And I'm also, see how you can feel that seam on the inside? I'm able to use that ridge to my advantage to try and push it up with my fingernails. Go back and clip that. I can probably get a cleaner corner right here with my closed scissors. There we go. These make great gifts. And pillows are almost one size fits all. Again, these instructions are for like a standard size pillow. You can make them for kings, for baby pillows. You just need to find the proper measurement that works for you. All right, let's go back to the cutting table and take a look at our finished project. Okay. There we have it. So initially 3 seams for this beautiful finished project. First seam is when we make the burrito and the tube and we sew everything together. The first seam is the first part of the French seam. And then the third and final seam is the one that encloses everything in there and makes it look all professional. All right, not too shabby, right? The little bathing beauties. Keep in mind, this is directional fabric. Some people are a little bit more OCD than others. I happen to really like this look. If you're somebody that wants it to be laying on the bed sideways and have the print going up and down this direction, you're gonna need to do a little bit more math, and you're gonna need more yardage because you're gonna have to cut the pieces going the other direction, and you're gonna have a little bit more waste. So decide if that's important to you, if maybe if it's decorative or it matches your quilt that you've already made or a bedspread, you may want it like this, almost as like a sham and something a little bit more fancy. For the most part, sleeping, kids, camping trips, you know, no one's in your tent checking it out. So the pattern this direction doesn't bother me, but it may bother you. So I'm so thrilled that I was able to walk you through our pattern step by step. I hope it made it a lot easier for you. And if you're working with kids, just take the little extra hints and comments. It will make all the difference in their success and their pride. So thanks for watching today. And again, if you need any help or have any questions, you can always visit our website at www.thecreationstation.com or come and take a visit to us in, again, beautiful Buellton, California. Bye. Oh, hi, are you still there? Hope you enjoyed our video. If you'd like to see more of us, you should visit us in person. We're located on the beautiful central coast of California in a tiny town named Buellton. We're 2 hours north of Los Angeles and just a wee bit south of Santa Maria. Our address is 252 East Highway 246, Unit A in Buellton, 93427. So if you get a chance and you're driving through, be sure to stop and see us, or you can always visit the website at don't forget the, creationstation.com. All right, enjoy. See you next time.